Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Wrestlenomics Radio. I'm Brandon Thurston, broadcasting live and on demand from Buffalo, New York, back from Chicago. Today is Labor Day. Happy Labor Day. It's September 5th, 2022. It's Monday, an unusual, special Monday edition of Wrestlenomics Radio, because yesterday was Sunday, and I was in Chicago for All Out 2022. We'll talk about all the things that transpired this past weekend, including All Out, including the presser that happened afterward, including Clash of the Castle, which seems very long ago now. But I'm joined today by our ring announcer, Chris Gullo.
Hello.
Hello. And by Jesse Collins, emerging from the dark today in the evening time.
Yeah. We were talking about I don't have an overhead light in my room, so I need to get like a bunch of stage lighting to really light this up.
Right. The Wrestlenomics asset management team will be contacting you soon. I've got my seltzers ready. Got my seltzers here. I'm ready for the big media event. What are we going to talk about today, Chris Gullo? I don't know. I kind of just did stole your spot, but go see if you can do better.
Yeah, so it was a very eventful weekend. All Out was this weekend. You were at All Out, so we'll get your feedback on being there live. You were also at the post-media scrum,
Yes.
which was very a lot of news coming out of that, I guess you could say. We'll also discuss Clash at the Castle, which was Saturday, WWE's event, and we'll also talk about Triple H's little over an hour interview with Ariel Helwani, where we got a lot of confirmation on some things and some further details. So
Strap in. It's going to be a long episode. I know Jesse's got to go watch Raw. He's got to get ready for Raw at 7:45, but we got a lot to cover here in the normal length of time. So let's just dive into it. There's what I think is a pretty great photo from J.J. Williams of Wrestling Observer Figure 4, who was there last night, of CM Punk at this presser. We're going to talk a little bit about this drama. This is because we're getting into things that ultimately may affect business and may affect the degree to which certain wrestlers are going to be willing to wrestle each other. The management of executives, Tony Khan's management of AEW. We're going to talk about that in addition to the things that more directly have to do with business, including pay-per-view buys. But anyway, this pay-per-view ends. We all get taken to this room where they're doing the press conference, which is, I gathered, adjoined to their backstage area. CM Punk is first. The microphone gets handed to Nick Hausman of Wrestling Inc. He just says his name and his outlet, and before he can begin speaking, which is not captured in the official AEW YouTube stream of the press conference, but CM Punk just sort of stops him, and this is on Denise Salcedo's recording of the press conference, but he just sort of stops him and says, I'll start it off, Nick, and says, who in this room fancies themselves a journalist? And, asking people to raise their hand. But we'll play.
Brandon, did people raise their
Yes.
hand when he said that?
I didn't, because I didn't want to be called on. But lots of people raised their hands, yes. That's all.
No, I was just curious to see like how people would react to that, because it wasn't quite clear where he was going with it at that point.
Yeah.
And so I would be curious to know like how many people like were like, yes, I'm a journalist. Call on me, CM Punk, or what. But I just thought that was kind of. I mean, I have thoughts on his rant, but you can go ahead.
Right. I seem to have gotten rid of our links here. Let's see here. Oh, here it is. Okay. So I'm going to jump around to a lot of timestamps here. The audio is a little bit weird for this. So I noticed everybody's voice sounds extra like deep and Darth Vader-y. But here's CM Punk just suddenly going off into talking about Colt Cabana because there have been a lot of questions about Colt Cabana. We'll get into all the details and the background information, but here's part of what CM Punk is saying, where he's alluding to the EVPs, presumably the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. Punk is basically saying that they planted a story in the media that blames Punk for Colt Cabana being relegated to Ring of Honor. So here's about a minute of Punk's comments.
The only reason the public did not see is because when I finally had to countersue him through discovery, we discovered he shared a bank account with his mother. That's a fact. And as soon as we discovered that fact and we subpoenaed old Marsha, he sent the email, oh, can we please drop all this? Now, it's 2022. I haven't been friends with this guy since at least 2014, late 2013. And the fact that I have to sit up here because we have irresponsible people who call themselves EVPs and couldn't fucking manage a target, and they spread lies and bullshit and put into a media that I got somebody fired when I have fuck all to do with him. Want nothing to do with him, do not care where he works, where he doesn't work, where he eats, where he sleeps. And the fact that I have to get up here and do this in 2022 is fucking embarrassing. And if y'all are at fault, fuck you. If you're not, I apologize. But what did I ever do in this world to deserve an empty-headed fucking dumb fuck like Hangman Adam Page to go out on national television and fucking go into business for himself? For what? What did I do, Dave? What did I ever do? Didn't do a goddamn thing.
Dave is saying there, you can't hear him off camera. He said, you tell us. So just quick background here. If you don't know, if you're just joining us, Colt Cabana and CM Punk were friends for many, many years on the indies. CM Punk infamously did this podcast, a 2-part podcast on Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling, talking about his experience leaving WWE. Part of that story includes talking about Dr. Chris Amon, who is one of the physicians for WWE, talking about how he misdiagnosed him with a staph infection, or didn't diagnose the staph infection. Anyway, talks about his negative experience with Dr. Amon. This results in Dr. Amon suing the both of them. They ended up being acquitted of any defamation, but Colt Cabana sues CM Punk for breach of contract. Punk countersues him. That's what he's talking about there. So events leading up to this quickly. On March 20th, 2022, this is just after Sasha Banks and Naomi have walked out of Raw. The following SmackDown, we get Michael Cole burying them, saying things to the effect of, what did they say? What were some of the famous meme-worthy lines that they say in this speech?
Unprofessional and disrespectful.
Summarily and unprofessionally walked out.
Yeah, let the fans down.
Okay.
That's what it was. Yep.
Okay. Next day, CM Punk tweets this: "It doesn't matter if your opinion of your coworker is positive or negative. Stand with them, because they'll do the same thing to you, and you'll wish someone helped. Trust me, you're expendable. Together, you're unstoppable." This results in the following Wednesday, a promo which, to most people, was nondescript at the time, May 25th, leading up to the Double or Nothing main event between Adam Page and CM Punk, where Adam Page says something about workers' rights, kind of calling CM Punk a hypocrite. This isn't a live promo on Dynamite. So all that happens. What do we have here? We already played that. So that's all what happened. Let's go to Tony Khan's comments on the EVP roles. The EVPs originally were Cody and 125. The EVPs were originally Cody, the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega. Cody is obviously no longer with AEW. And let's see, what are they really up to these days, if I can find the timestamp?
Day one, and I think the business has grown. And no, I think those guys have been key people and
a little deeper into specifically
the people that drive revenue, and they help create jobs for everyone. So I'm not gonna comment on what you may have heard here, but the fact is, like I've said earlier this week, it's no secret a lot of professional wrestlers don't like each other, but I think now it's probably more out in the open than it's been in a while. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for the pro wrestling business, given what the product that we produce is, and it's wrestling matches, and it involves tension and people wanting to fight. And people know there's a lot of people that want to fight each other around here now, and I don't think that's terrible. Hey.
I would just like to dive a little deeper into specifically the elite and the contributions
John
that
Alba
they've
asking
had
the
to your
question.
company as EVPs and helping you get the company off the ground there. And as you've brought in different attractions throughout, roles have shifted in some degree, one way or another. Where do they currently stand within your regime here in AEW? Have their roles changed in any capacity as some of these things have unfolded?
No, I think those guys have been key people in the planning and the organization of the shows and involved in the business from day one. And I think the business has grown, and I've had to take on more, but I think those guys have taken on strong roles, and you saw tonight what an amazing match they put together on screen, and they have huge behind the scenes contributions in terms of the business and different aspects, whether it's Kenny and video gaming and important revenue streams that we're driving, and the Young Bucks and many things, mentoring and the leadership they provide. And it was a big milestone tonight. I don't want to take it lightly. Like, it's very cool to me that Kenny Omega is the first Triple Crown champion in AEW history. I think it's really cool to have somebody who's been the world champion, a tag team champion, and now the first trios champion. And it's a very cool way for Kenny to come back. And I think Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks is one of the best acts in professional wrestling, and behind the scenes, incredibly valuable people too. AJ.
Okay. Did you get any sense there of what Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks do in their roles as EVPs in that response?
Only that Kenny is really involved in the video game.
Yeah.
Right. So there was a report, I want to say Dave reported it a while ago, a year or two ago, kind of when it was kind of basically defining what the EVPs do. And what I've heard from people is that Kenny is very involved with the video game. That's like his office job, essentially. Matt Jackson is involved with merchandise, which makes sense. His wife, I believe, runs the merchandise. Correct?
Her
Yeah.
title is Chief Marketing Officer, I believe.
Yeah. And Nick Jackson handles
Dana Massey.
Yeah, and Nick Jackson's I guess I don't know if he's paid for extra for whatever, but he handles BTE, being elite. Mm-hmm. So they're side projects, but they're not necessarily in what you would consider maybe an executive capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. My read is that, and I've said this before, it's kind of the original sin of AEW is that they had to start it by enticing Cody, Young Bucks, and Kenny Omega to come to this new company and give them some sort of promise that they would have control, and that they would have employee roles that would give them additional benefits, probably including health insurance and perhaps other benefits. But it's not real clear to me what they do that reflects what a normal executive vice president at a company like this would do, which sounds like maybe CM Punk has a similar read when he calls them people who are not suited to supervise a target or something like that. Okay. So, yeah. This comes from Steve Muehlhausen, if I can put it on the screen, who reports, he says, according to sources, there was an altercation between CM Punk and the Young Bucks early Monday. The Bucks confronted Punk about his comments at the scrum. It did get physical, with Punk throwing punches at least at one member of the Bucks. A number of people intervened to separate everyone. More to come. Then he tweets just an hour ago. Steve Muehlhausen is from DAZN, by the way. Sources, the animosity between CM Punk and the Young Bucks began first around the All Out 2019 pay-per-view when they were trying to get Punk to come out of retirement. The Bucks felt slighted and were upset, and it's been slowly bubbling since, and ultimately led to what happened early Monday. Punk did it comes to mind. Punk made some comment somewhere, right, that that somebody was texting him, and it seems to have been the Bucks at some point before he came to AEW, and he thought that was not the most professional way to do that. So there's that.
There's something that just dropped from I don't know. I can't tell if this is from Fightful or from the Wrestling Observer site. I'm reading it on the Observer site, but
There's a teaser from Fightful. Oh, go ahead, Jesse.
It says, according to multiple sources that lined up with some of Fightful's reporting, there was a fight backstage afterward with Punk allegedly starting things by swinging fists at the Bucks' Matt Jackson. Punk's trainer/friend and AEW producer Ace Steel threw a chair that hit the Bucks' Nick Jackson in the eye. Omega was also involved with Steel, grabbing his hair and biting him. The way that's written does not indicate if Omega grabbed Steel's hair and bit him, or Steel grabbed Omega's hair and bit him. But that was the latest. That just dropped from Fightful.
So other people have pointed out that you can see at one point, while Tony is taking questions from the media, there's a security guard who's standing there at the presser who runs to the back in a big hurry. So presumably this was happening while the press conference was still going on, while the CEO of the company was in a press conference. Because Punk was first, he returned to the back, and it sounds like this physical conflict ensued soon after. Yeah.
We do have we have a super chat while we're on this topic, so might as well ask it here from Ryoga 316. Given Punk verbally and probably physically attacked the EVPs, shouldn't he be punished for going against the executive, or is this all a work?
So let's go. I don't believe any of this is a work.
Agreed.
That's not my read. I think the MJF parts of it were a work. I think there was. This is my read. Okay, this is not information based on something that I was told. I believe the MJF thing was. I'm suspicious now too that it does line up. I think I was DMing this to Jesse last night. It does line up to be just about 90 days since he was last on television. I wonder if he was quietly suspended for 90 days. Anyway, my read is that very few people knew what was going to happen from that point on, from June 1st onward with MJF. If you tried to bring up MJF, you were quickly shut down by people at AEW. And I think a lot of people were also just left in the dark, right? But I think they knew where they were going, and they were probably going to have him come back at All Out, which is just about 90 days after. I don't think the no showing of the meet and greet at Double or Nothing weekend was a work. I doubt it. I'm sure Wardlow is legitimately not happy about his big win being overshadowed. Maybe MJF went further than he was expected to with some of his comments in the promo on June 1st Dynamite. But anyway, I don't believe any of this is a work. Certainly the Colt Cabana stuff is not a work. And I don't believe that any of these issues between Punk and the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega is a work. Why? It's hard for me to explain why. I just have this intuition that sure, is there money to be made in like an FTR and Punk and Young Bucks and Omega match? Sure. Is there money to be made in a Punk versus Kenny Omega match? Definitely. But I don't think this is a work.
Dan Kugler has a super chat too, just asking what are the ramifications.
I didn't address the first part of this question.
Oh yeah, sorry.
By Golo. So the first part of the previous super chat though, that shouldn't there be consequences essentially, right? I was having a quick talk with Dave last night. That when in the last couple of years that I was wrestling, I was sort of coming to this opinion in the face of a very scripted WWE environment where everything is super controlled and everything feels super fake. You know, the matches have to be a work, and the matches can be this great performance, right? But why do the promos have to be a work? Why can't the promos just be as real as life? That's sort of some ideal that I have in my head. I don't know if this works out great in practice. That's a different issue. But AEW is turning into something like that, where, and there's a lot of things to get into here, from like Tony's effectiveness as a manager here, but there's clearly a lot of personal feelings getting hurt in the course of this. And is it going to be worth it when you're going to end up having, you know, a big money match? You probably want to book a Punk versus Kenny Omega match. You probably want to book a Punk versus Adam Page match. By the way, I don't believe that the Adam Page stuff is a work either. Don't come at me with it's probably all work. This a lot of this stuff is not a work. I told you the Cody thing was not a work. It's not a work. He's in WWE now. Yeah.
I think to both this super chat and Dan Kukler's super chat, what are the ramifications of Punk starting it? A few weeks ago, we found out that Eddie Kingston, pie-faced Sammy Guevara after not liking a promo segment, and Eddie was suspended. I don't know if we know how long he was suspended for, and I
maybe like
assume
2 weeks.
he might have been fined as well.
And I think
that's
part of the punishment was evident in the pay-per-view as well. Sammy Guevara and Eddie Kingston were on the pre-show.
Right.
0 hour or whatever it's called.
And they were supposed to wrestle each other at All Out. That was originally the plan, and obviously they ended up wrestling different people.
And I presume
probably
that
worked out better.
I presume that would have been on the main show, and them being on the pre-show probably means a lower payday for them.
Mm-hmm. And so that's at least a precedent, and that's something I think both Eddie and Sammy through their respective outlets have both kind of said that we're over it, we're fine. Like, it was dumb. Eddie admitted that what he did was wrong and he shouldn't put his hands on him. Was this what Punk did? Punk is a much bigger star than Eddie Kingston is. Oh, but this seems to be the reporting about this backstage fight is somewhat accurate. This is far more significant than Eddie just pie-facing Sammy. We're talking about punches being thrown, and not just with the EVPs, who are big stars on their own right. So the precedent would be set that Punk would have to at least be suspended.
After you just got him back from injury, just put the title back on him.
And I mean, this is the thing.
He's already just gone into business for himself. He's already just gone on television and called out Adam Page in a totally, rogue moment where Adam Page was not about to come out for an angle.
And look, and to get to your point about this is AEW's attempting to kind of cultivate controversy in some certain ways, or at least capitalize on real life controversy. Punk is probably going to be on Dynamite Wednesday, and it's probably going to be one of the biggest. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to speculate on what the rating could be, but it seems like it would be there's a huge amount of interest in watching Dynamite this Wednesday. Not to mention, even take the whole press conference aside, he's got this feud with MJF, which should be the hottest thing in the company.
Yeah. And just something else to add to that, to what Tony also seems to be embracing, that look, we promote fights here. He doesn't say it this way, but yes, they're fake fights. It's a work, but we promote personal issues of conflict that are resolved in matches that people pay to see. The problem is that complicates the difference between pro wrestling in this case and UFC in this case is that in UFC you get to actually punch your opponent in the face as hard as you can in the culmination. In the case of pro wrestling, you have to cooperate to produce the most dramatic match possible, or whatever your intention is, and do it safely without terribly injuring your opponent.
If I could touch on that, he brings up, the 90s, there was a lot of, no one hated each other in the 90s and all that. Yeah, there was a lot of, you hear about the Clique and Bret Hart and all that. But the difference is there was some type of quality control. Now you hear of a lot of drama in the WCW locker room, and there was no quality control. And I mean, that just spiraled. Like, there has to be some. I mean, when EVPs and a coach is involved in an altercation, that's just bad management. I've been a manager in multiple different industries. That's just not like, that's not good when executives and managers are getting in altercations with employees.
Yes. I think the comparisons to the 90s are not great analogies. If this was the 90s, first of all, there would be no press conferences. Secondly, anything that happened, it would be harder to assume that a larger portion of the audience is aware of what's going on. It's a lot. As further on we get in time, the more the internet is ubiquitous in people's lives, the easier. And still not completely. There's a large portion of fans who are aware of what happened last night and are aware of these reports that are coming out. If this was the 90s, a very, very small portion of the audience would be aware. Still today, there will be some portion of the audience on Monday night or Wednesday night in Buffalo when they do Dynamite and we're there. There's going to be a lot of people who are still not aware of this. It's just I don't know how to describe their engagement, but they're going to go to the show and they're not going to. But a lot of them will be aware of what's happened. Much greater a portion than would have been aware in 1997 when Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels are pulling each other's hair out in the back. What does that mean? It means that it's easier for this to be translated into business. I think MJF being as big a star as he is a great example of that. If this whole drama around MJF in the last 3 months, if this had happened in 1992 or 1997, it would not have made MJF into a big a star as he is after last night, because just people wouldn't be aware enough about it for it to result in such an emotional response, which you heard from the crowd. And by the way, I was there live. I was up in the suite with the Voice of Wrestling people, and the pop at the end of the night when MJF reveals, he takes the mask off and all that. Spoiler alert. Enormous energy. I've seen the clip. The clip does not do it justice in terms of how electric the response was. Enormous. But yeah, media changes all this. Marshall McLuhan was right. That's all I have to say for now. Go ahead. Somebody else talk.
I think that so the 90s, like Brand said, most people wouldn't know about the Click or WCW, and like a lot of that stuff was bad. Like people can say like, oh, in the 90s, people were doing this and left and right and backstage. Like that doesn't make it good because it happened during a popular time in pro wrestling. A lot of that stuff was a negative for the industry. It burned people off of it. It handicapped careers that were promising. All these things, like it's not like it's a positive thing just because it happened in the 90s. Listening to Tony's kind of reaction, he addressed it later, and you played that clip earlier when he kind of talks about, there are real feelings involved, and we people know that people are fighting. A lot of people know that now. He seemed like nonplussed by everything that happened. When I was watching the presser, I was like, this is a disaster. He's got to like tackle Punk to keep him from talking. Like they need to get him off the screen. Like this is a nightmare for AEW. It's going to destroy the company, all this stuff. And I was seeing, various takes on social media, and it's like, maybe I'm overreacting to how bad this seems to be. And something interesting, like, okay, we talked about the 90s, but an interesting point that was raised to me today was the UFC, which I think Tony is inspired by in a lot of ways, which makes sense because they're an extremely effective sports model and use a lot of traditional pro wrestling elements in their promotion. But if you watch a UFC press conference, Dana White, John Jones, Conor McGregor, whoever you want, their biggest stars, they all yell at each other. They all insult each other. They all are what you consider completely inappropriate and unprofessional with each other. And obviously that's a very successful business model. And so I can see Tony sitting back and saying, oh yeah, if people know that these guys really don't hate each other, or if people know that these guys really hate each other, that's just good for business. That's going to help drive up our revenue. That's going to help create interest in their next big match. It's going to lead to bigger television ratings. He seems like he's just kind of accepting all the ego and politicking as part of the realities of running a major wrestling company, and he seems interested in exploiting the kind of mass interest people have now in backstage politics and things like that in a way that no other wrestling promoter really has before. And it's definitely a gamble.
I guess I'm going all around here, but to try to address the last two super chat questions about the consequences, I mean, there's clearly going to be different consequences, and Jesse kind of mentioned that in terms of comparing the situations of Eddie Kingston, Sammy Guevara, to what's happened with CM Punk or what hasn't happened with CM Punk in terms of there being a punishment. Yeah, I don't know. There's going to be different consequences for different people, and that's not fair, but that's probably what's going to happen. Personally, like as I was sitting there, it was kind of dawning on me that if that was almost anybody else, they wouldn't. The wrestling public, the wrestling fan public, whoever it is that pays attention to news like this, would not receive him as well if he was almost anybody else. He would just be an asshole. But I still find something likable about him, even in these moments. I don't know if it's just the way he speaks. I think he's a really compelling narrator of moments like this. I think, the podcasts that he does with Cabana in 2014 are just some really compelling storytelling. I think they're, it's one of the greatest podcasts maybe of any genre ever. And in some ways, this felt like a latest installment of that. And he's a complicated character that you did. I'm not saying like he's in the right, but he gets away with it on sort of like an emotional level with me and maybe with the wrestling public, and maybe he shouldn't, because he is this likable star still.
Well, there's a reason, Brandon, he's a very successful professional wrestler. He's very charismatic. And that charisma that makes him popular as a wrestler and makes him such an engaging promo as a wrestling performer, carries over into this setting where his honesty and his brutal, assessment of things, and the fact that you don't think, I think he's kind of bullshitting people, but he's not bullshitting people in the way that most wrestlers do in that kind of presser.
He's being very transparent with his own thoughts.
Yes. And, I don't take kindly to him getting up there like a lunatic and essentially trying to intimidate the rest of the media that was there. I thought that was totally inappropriate. And I can be as critical as anyone of the wrestling media, but it's 100% not okay to get up there without even taking a question and just bashing members of the wrestling media and calling, everyone essentially liars and people who don't care about the truth or anything like that for something that he clearly is very insecure about, which is his relationship with Scott Colton. And so to me, that stuff doesn't fly.
So how about this in terms of consequences? What would happen, do you think, if Tony Khan, what would CM Punk do is what I'm trying to get at. If Tony Khan suspended him and fined him heavily.
Might not come back. Hold out.
Yes. I think then it's like, here's somebody who's clearly very prone to conflict, maybe overreacts. And if he's punished by his boss, maybe that shatters that relationship. And maybe you don't have your top star anymore, which is kind of a vicious cycle. Yeah.
I think, it's really interesting because Punk, from what we can gather from yesterday, Punk is not a guy who is here because Tony Khan is paying him a lot of money and he wants to make a lot of money, just showing up and working as a wrestler, and he wants to be a top star. For all of his criticisms of the EVPs, they do at least come from a place, or they appear to come from a place where Punk really wants the company to be very successful and he really wants to make a big difference in the wrestling industry. And he felt like EVPs and Hangman or whatever, his enemies in the company, are holding things back with their inadequacies. And I think that's pretty interesting, because if he was just a guy who was just wanted to make a lot of money in wrestling and he liked, having the world title and things like that. Like if he was like Brock Lesnar, like he wouldn't really care. He wouldn't, be out on this press conference, yelling at things. It does come from the perspective that he wants the company to be really successful. And I think that makes it more interesting to see, like, will he just take his ball and go home because he feels like, he was disrespected by Tony Khan if he gets suspended or something like that? I seen that be less likely because he does seem, at least on the surface, very committed to making AEW successful. And I think that is an interesting aspect to this whole thing, which is it's coming from his passion for this in a lot of ways seems to be coming from a place of concern for the long-term aspects of the company.
Yeah.
I just say, I think if he just shoots on the Colt Cabana situation, doesn't bring the EVPs involved in this or Adam Page, I think it's a much different conversation. It's a guy that probably was just frustrated, a lot of questions and answered it. And it's a typical AEW post media scrum. Like, just one question that kind of garners a little attention. He did it. Oh, go ahead.
No. Read the super chat. Okay.
Well, I was just going to say here, Stilio Latino, thank you, asked, how could Warner Brothers Discovery react to the AEW drama?
It's one of those things where, like, I think, well, maybe it matters. Maybe it's too low on the radar. Maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it doesn't matter at all. It's just like, what ratings do you deliver? But there's some other, maybe at least more general way that I think this could affect things negatively for AEW's general values. I think I've said this before on Wrestlenomics, is that this is like a Scott Galloway thing. The brand is a composite of three things. It's the quality of your product and services. For AEW, they're doing pretty well there. It's the effectiveness of your communication. So this would be like with your fans, the messaging. Do you deliver the matches that you advertise? Do you clearly communicate with fans? I'm sure there are some complaints that people could think of here, but not that bad of a job, at least, right? And then it's the behavior of your executives and talent, and this is clearly a negative for that. But it's pro wrestling, and does this, enhance it in some way that offsets it and more? I don't know. It's definitely made our job here today a lot more interesting. I thought it was. A lot of people have been messaging me because they knew I was at the press conference last night, and I've been telling them, yeah, it was a good pay-per-view. It was an even more memorable scrum presser because it was, I don't know. I try to or I just sort of consume this stuff in a more meta way, or in a meta way in addition to the content. But it was a very compelling, captivating moment.
The biggest thing to me would be if Warner Bros. Discovery, if someone in Warner Bros. Discovery has either affinity or relationship with CM Punk, and we've seen that before, that the biggest stars in certain programs have partnerships and deals and relationships with the network that may be not open to everyone on the roster. I could see that.
I'm sure they are familiar. I'm sure people who AEW talks to at Warner Brothers Discovery on a regular basis, I'm sure those people know who CM Punk is and see him as a valuable star.
I'm talking about a direct relationship perhaps between Punk and someone at Warner Brothers Discovery. And then that Punk's assessment of the company reflecting negatively back on AEW, I think, would be something. I mean, look, in the short term, which would be like the Dynamite this week and perhaps maybe the next pay-per-view or the Arthur Ashe show, whatever, their big matches are going to be. In the short term, I see this as a positive for AEW's business. A lot of people are talking about them today. A lot of people are excited to see what's going to happen on Wednesday. To me, this is more of a medium or long-term risk where people are very unhappy working in the company. People are very upset with they feel like they're being treated, certain people are being held to a different standard, all of these kind of things. Those would be negatives. But in the short term, I see this as this is a immediate positive for AEW. Is the risk of the short-term gain worth kind of potentially alienating people on your roster, alienating some of your biggest stars, people synonymous with the company like the Elite are? Probably not, but at least a moment, I'd see this as a positive. One thing I wanted to add, just a lot of people have said this today. Oh, like if I got into a fight at my job with my boss or an executive vice president or things like that, it would, it'd be different. I mean, this is the entertainment industry, right? This is there's a reason there's all sorts of Hollywood gossip columns and things like that. This stuff happens in the entertainment industry. Wild and crazy things happen in the music industry. They happen in the movie industry. They happen in television. They happen in pro sports. There's fights in NFL training camp sometimes between prominent star players all the time. And yet those businesses all keep going on and make money and they don't implode. It's not a good thing in this isolated incident, but it's not necessarily something that you can draw a comparison towards like a more typical job that people have.
I guess, are we getting to who's to like a Bob Knight situation here? Or is he the one? There's another basketball coach though who like in the late 90s like choked one of his players. Am I remembering this?
Yeah,
correctly?
Bobby Knight he headbutted one of his own players, and there are a lot of instances of abuse and violence.
Yeah, there was like a Latrell Sprewell.
Yep.
Latrell Sprewell strangled his coach PJ Carlismo in the 90s.
Anyway, there's clearly lines that would, if you're not a big enough star, that aren't good to cross. But anyway, yeah, we have other super chats here.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, so we do have a couple if we want to keep rolling with them.
Go ahead.
Well,
I have one other question to.
Yeah. Just got on here from Easy Tag. How was your weekend, Brandon? Ha ha ha. I'm doing an ad card analysis of AEW this month.
Ely.
Yep. Wrestlenomics. If you don't know what that is, just read the article. Chris Ely. So anytime Chris puts an article on Wrestlenomics, they're great. And yeah, the ad card analysis is about management.
Do you know what that is? You familiar with that?
I'm a little familiar with it. Yeah, I've had to read a lot of manager books and go to seminars and everything. Like I said, I've been a manager of people, so this situation, like, I'm very intrigued how it's going to be handled.
Okay. So here we are. We've had another presser here. I know we have other super chats, but let's do this now. The media. By the way, I want to mention. We've been. At least Jesse has been, and I'm not opposed to the criticism that the wrestling media have faced after these press conferences. So we haven't even talked about the Triple H press conference actually. Minimal applause. There was minimal applause. I did see one AEW PR person try to lead the applause at least at the end. I did see that, and I some people definitely went along with it, but most people didn't. That's more superficial. What did you've Jesse, at least, and I think Gullo has, Gabe, both have listened to the entire thing. What do you think about the job that the wrestling media did, me not included, because of course I did a great job, right? We'll get to Tony's response to my question in a moment.
I thought this was the most impressed I've been by the wrestling media from the pressers that I have seen in AEW. I didn't feel like there were a lot of kayfabe questions that were being asked necessarily.
The key things were Swerve Strickland was all kayfabe stuff.
Right. Some of the talent was kayfabe, and me and Gullo were actually talking about this off air. Just it's hard when people ask kayfabe questions for wrestlers to not answer in kayfabe, which complicates things, and they're really blurring the lines between kayfabe and not kayfabe with a lot of this stuff, so it's hard to tell. But I thought the questions were good. Like in general, a lot of them were focused, following up on Tony's kind of comments from the media call before the show, which he alluded to, like WWE treated him badly, and he,
John Alba brought up the tampering, the contract tampering issue, which is something that has been reported by Fightful. He kind of evaded it, and then later Nick Hausman brought it up in a more, what were you referring to about your relationship with WWE? Mm-hmm. He didn't really. Maybe he got massaged by PR between
yeah,
Thursday
that's what I think happened, is that he was coached up, because he seemed like he was on the verge. He literally said, like in the media call before the show, he said something like, "I'm not going to talk about it unless someone asks me." And then unfortunately no one asked him, and when I was talking to you about potential questions, like, we got to ask him about the tampering, because he was dying to talk about it was it Thursday? He was dying to talk about it on Thursday.
Yes.
But I think he avoided that, which is fine. I'm glad people asked him about it. And there were good follow-ups to that. But I thought the questions were good. I thought, like I said, I think Punk came out and tried to intimidate people. And that it maybe worked in some certain way where, he really attacked them in an adversarial way that no one in these pressers has really done before. And then even Swerve and Keith Lee, not nearly to the degree of Punk, but the same way, we're kind of like, Keith Lee said, like, I don't read social media. I don't care what people are saying about it.
It's beneath him.
Yeah. And Swerve, on the opposite, said, like, he said, I listen to all y'all podcasts. I know everything that's going on with what you guys say about us. And he sounded, kind of personally aggrieved. People talking about how, people were saying that other people tag teams should have it.
Yep.
I mean, I actually found Keith Lee and Swerve kind of charming during it. I understand they're kind of bullshitting with being in character, but I thought it was.
I didn't take it to be like sincerely hostile or anything.
No,
like Punk
no, not the way Punk was.
That.
Yeah. But I like the question. Like, I thought a lot of good questions. I thought people followed up on certain subjects, which I think is really important. I wouldn't have children there. I think they served their purpose though, in sense of kind of lobbing some nice, easy questions for.
I think
to break it up.
In at least Izzy's defense, she asked a question about people not getting along. That was like a serious question. I don't know if she's 18 or not now, but but yes, AJ is awesome was there too. Who's like 12.
It almost diffused the situation. He asked just a softball question, and it gets a little. I think that's why Tony wanted to end it with a question from him.
Yeah.
He said, he's like, AJ, you said you seemed like you had something to want to ask, and then he asked, like, what was it like having CM Punk's dog backstage?
Yes.
Larry ended the press.
But I mean, this was an explosive presser in. I don't know, like, obviously Punk came out, didn't even need a question. All he needed to do was see Nick Hausman's face, and then suddenly he was off to the races.
I wonder how predetermined that was. Like, if he decided, you want me to do the presser? I'm going to fucking lay it down,
I don't know if
Nick being there is what ticked him off, or...
I mean, he knew, he knew Nick had done some improv with Colt, which is extremely inside baseball. I don't know what percentage of people would know that. It'd be very, very small. And like I was talking, you asked, like, did Nick break a big story on Colts, and Punk's beforehand? And that's not really the case.
I think what I'm piecing together is like in a previous press conference, Nick Hausman raised the question about Cabana. I think that's what happened.
That was a long time ago. That was like when Punk first came back, I think. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
Was that when
a previous pay-per-view, I think.
Yeah. And that was a question a lot of people knew, is that these guys have this big feud and now they're working in the same company together. And Tony admitted that he probably shouldn't have issued no comment on it. He should have just said, like, it's fine, something we've addressed, and we're going to be good moving forward. But and then Tony, obviously, he didn't talk about the tampering, but he did talk about some of his frustrations with WWE, and I think that was the other big thing to take away from this presser.
We can we'll play that now. That's a great setup. So we'll go to Tony Khan being asked about the tampering.
Music on that one.
On the media call the other day, you said if somebody asked you about something that you would go into things more in depth on it. And it was heavily insinuated throughout the call, based on media reports as well, that there may have been potential contract tampering or allegations of such. Here's me asking about that further. Is there any comment that you would like to provide on that based on the media reports?
I can't say what happened between anybody. I'm just, all that you may have heard, I can't really comment on it. I think what the wrestlers and what the talent and the staff and the people here come and say to us is between me and them. And now here is arguably the great.
Okay. So there's John Alba trying to ask about the tampering. And then we'll jump to, I think it's Nick Hausman following up on that.
I wanted to ask about a kind of a follow-up
Sure, man.
about your comments about alluding to contract tampering. You were also asked about a potential WWE AEW Super Show, and you said not after the way they treated me. What happened when you say something like that? How were you treated? What was the exchange there with WWE?
I've had a number of interactions with them, and I don't know. I'm not, I was super. I've said a lot of nice stuff, and I don't regret saying nice stuff because I'm super honest about pro wrestling. And when I saw good stuff happening there, I'll be the first to say it. But yeah, I just am not feeling the same love. I don't want to get into it, but I just haven't felt the same reciprocation that I have for them.
Okay. So there's him talking a little bit about what he was alluding to on the Thursday media phone conference call. Anything to add there, or we could just jump to my question about pay-per-view buys, which adds more on this subject.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're hinting at, right? Is your question, which got him to talk more about his frustrations with WWE than these much more direct questions that we're asking him for the information directly, which I think is an interesting.
I think the sequence of events led to this.
Yeah,
but
it's very interesting how it all develops.
But here we go.
You have their roles changed in any capacity?
That's not what I wanted. I thought I had it. 120.28. Okay. 120, right about there.
And move on with business, and that's a part of it. Thank you.
Hi, Tony.
Hey, man.
Brandon Thurston from
Yes,
Wrestlenomics.
well aware, sir. Sorry,
Some
but
give
for
a very
the
deep
yes,
voice.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on you. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Can you tell us how this pay-per-view is selling? Usually get digital right away.
Yeah, digital. So I am going to say I don't have an exact number for you. I think it's probably, there's a chance it's going to be the second highest all out ever. It may not be the highest all out. It might be the first time we haven't hit that high. I knew last year the all-time high would be challenging. There's a big difference between this year and last year. We were the first professional wrestling show and the only professional wrestling show on Labor Day weekend last year. And we were the third professional wrestling show of the weekend this year. I don't think that's a coincidence. And when I talk about things I wasn't thrilled about, I was a little surprised we were the third professional wrestling show this weekend. And it's probably a little bit more challenging in the marketplace when it becomes a little more crowded. So our performance, given, the prior years, we never had this kind of competition, and it's kind of a first for us in AEW to see this kind of crowded marketplace. I'm not sure if this is what we'll see from now on. If it is, when the fight is brought, I will continue bringing fights of my own, and I have unique ways to do that. A lot of money to fight with. And this is not a game to me. This is my life, and I don't think it's a joke, and I take it really seriously. And, yeah, so I am very happy with the numbers we did. Given the competition we had, I was hoping that it would be the all-time high for All Out, but I'm not sure it's going to quite hit that. So it's the first time an AEW pay-per-view in history did not top the number before, probably. But that being said, it's still going to be, again, the second highest number we've ever done for All Out. And this year will end up being the biggest year on pay-per-view in AEW's history by far for pay-per-view revenue. It won't even be close. So even with full gear to come, I'm quite confident this will be our all-time high for pay-per-view revenue. It's pretty similar to the other pay-per-views this year. I think it would be Forbidden Door was an unprecedented success and the biggest debut in AEW pay-per-view history. A lot of the buys were international, and the price point is obviously a little bit lower on international. I think this would be more total buys and a higher domestic percentage, so the revenue would be significantly higher than Forbidden Door. I'd expect it to be similar to Double or Nothing, but All Out last year was higher than Double or Nothing was last year. Double or Nothing this year was a high all-time for Double or Nothing, obviously. I don't know if we'll quite hit that, but I do think it's going to be in that range. So very good, given the competition that we've never faced before. This is kind of an unprecedented marker, in my opinion, but it's still the number is the number, and I have to face the competition out there. But when I compare myself to Jim Crockett Promotions this weekend, I think I got a taste of the same medicine Jim Crockett Promotions took. But I have a lot more fucking money than Jim Crockett did, and I'm serious. I'm not going to sit back and take this fucking shit.
The stare after he says, "I'm not going to take this fucking shit," and looks around for anyone to potentially confront him on that. So funny,
right? I don't know if that's the way he meant it, but
no, it's just the way he looks. I mean, it's so because he starts kind of talking about the competition and how it's I was surprised to see that, and then he goes off on his classic Tony kind of, I'm going to review every single one of our pay-per-view buys this year and talk about how they compare to year per year. And then he comes back to the competition point, and then he, kind of lets his true feelings go, which is that he feels like he's Jim Crockett, which, obviously Jim Crockett's pay-per-views are run head-to-head with WWF pay-per-views. There were a lot of games being played back in the 80s. But he said he has a lot more money than Jim Crockett, which I believe is true. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that.
Yes.
And
at least his dad does.
Yes, his dad does. I mean, even to scale, I mean, just his television revenue alone would dwarf what Jim Crockett's was making.
Yeah. So he said that it's looking like All Out, last night's pay-per-view, will do similar to what Double or Nothing did. Double or Nothing, I believe, did 155,000 buys, somewhere in that area, 155,000. The high for this year so far has been Revolution. In March, 165,000. What was on the Revolution pay-per-view?
That would be Hangman versus Adam Cole versus Hangman, Adam Cole, MJF and Punk, right?
Yeah, MJF and Punk. Yep.
Okay. So anyway, we'll see what happens, and I'll continue to ask and try to find out. But I'm glad we got some idea. That was really towards the end of the press conference. I was sort of afraid that nobody's going to ask that question. There's that. If we look at cage match reception, this is sitting after 232 votes, which is about halfway there compared to Forbidden Door. Maybe there's another 100 votes or so to come in, but up 7.8, which would be low, which would be better than Double or Nothing actually, but which would be lower than some AEW pay-per-views, which have reached the 9s, the high 8s. So I think I would say this is within the standard range of an AEW pay-per-view for a cage match rating, in terms of just why is that important to think about? How much do people feel like they got their money's worth here? Within the range. On the lower end of the range, though. I think he sounded like he was ready to spin this into okay, we were not able to use the talking point anymore that every pay-per-view was the record for that branded pay-per-view, because All Out, that record wasn't going to be broken, given it did 205,000 pay-per-views or 205,000 buys last year, and that featured the first match from CM Punk in 7 years. There's only one time you can really do that. But now you can say that, well, at least this year we sold more total buys. We drove more pay-per-view revenue for a year than we have in prior years. So that seems to be the new talking point. Yeah. Anything else to add to that? You're muted.
Nothing else, but there's a super chat from Sijizzle asking, how close does $100 million gross get AEW to profit?
$100 million revenue. If the question is, if AEW made $100 million in a year, which is roughly what they would make in a year, probably a year like this, where I believe that they're getting guaranteed escalating TV rights fees for a large portion of their TV revenue. I think they're getting some of that is ad revenue that depends on ad sales. But I don't know. It's really hard for me to calculate expenses. I would continue to be skeptical that, or at least dubious that AEW is profitable until they get a significantly higher TV deal, which may happen in their next round of negotiations. Another question I wanted to ask that we didn't get to was, according to Dave's report, I'm pointing to Dave, he's over here.
Is he?
No, but he was when I was sitting there. In January 2020, they made this new deal. So they're not just getting the cost of production anymore and maybe an ad revenue share, but they're actually getting $43 million, whatever it is, $44 million average annual value. So that's for 2020, 2021, 2022, and with an option for 2023, I believe. Or it takes it to... Anyway, there's a 1-year option. Has that option been picked up by Warner Brothers Discovery? Has it already been picked up? If it hasn't, do you expect it to be? Because that determines when they're going to negotiate. I've always said on here that I assume that it's going to be picked up, just because it's doing fairly well in the ratings. It's ranking whatever. What does Tony's tweet here say? He says it's been ranking number 1 or number 2 in 1849 for 14 straight Wednesdays. Dynamite has. So I would think it's probably worth it for them to extend it for a year at probably what is just whatever their rate of annual escalation is, maybe like somewhere between 5 and 10%.
Brandy, can I ask?
Yes.
Do you think that Clash at the Castle and the Worlds Collide event had a significant impact on pay-per-view buys? Tony obviously seemed to believe that they did.
Right.
I guess I'm a little more incredulous about those events, which are on Peacock, which don't require a purchase, really, having that big of an impact on the potential.
I certainly don't believe that it made the difference between. Let's put this on the screen. I certainly don't believe it made the difference between 155,000 buys and 200,000 buys or something like that, which, if you didn't know better, you might take away from his comments. Maybe it made a difference in a few thousand, maybe 10,000. I don't think it was this tremendous. This isn't the same thing as Starrcade 87 and Survivor Series 87 or something like that. This isn't the same thing as WrestleMania 5 or whatever it was, and Clash of the Champions 6. They weren't running head-to-head either, which is another.
No, they were on different.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think the NXT Worlds Collide thing, I don't think that means anything.
Right. That was the same day, but a much slower profile. show.
Clash of the Castle was a Saturday afternoon show.
Yeah. But I think it's something, but it's not a lot. And it's not another high, $50 pay-per-view.
In his response, he goes, there's a big difference between last year's All Out and this year's All Outs. And the answer is last year's All Out was CM Punk's first match in a decade.
Yes.
And that was obviously the big reason that pay-per-view did so well. And I thought that's what he was going to say. And then he launched into the competition he was being from WWE.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. $1 Million Gate, according to Tony, which, based on, I think we mentioned in the last week's episode, if average ticket prices were about $125, which seems believable based on $80 being the lowest price I could find on the map, that adds up given how many tickets were out there. I did, I was, walking past the box office, and I did ask at one point while the show was underway. I went up to the person standing at the box office, not the person in the box office, but the person standing at the beginning of the line. Like, can I go buy tickets right now if I wanted to? And they were like, yeah. So you could still buy tickets to this show. I asked Mr. WrestleTix, is this the first time that tickets were so available? Like, I know they finalized their configuration and then they released a few tickets here and there and whatnot. But apparently the Orlando pay-per-view and the Minneapolis pay-per-view, which I think is, Full Gear and Revolution?
Mm-hmm.
Those were similarly, you could find some tickets available at the end. Whereas maybe the others were really urgent, quick sellouts. But anyway. Anything else? Is that everything for this AEW pay-per-view? Any other final super chats to clean up?
Nope, we clean up all the super chats. Dynamite's live in our backyard, Brandon, on Wednesday, so that's going to be interesting.
Yes. John Paul.
Are you guys going?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to buy a ticket at the box office to escape ticket service fees. John Pollock and Wei Ting from Post Wrestling are coming.
You're not going to sit in the media section with all your Buffalo media friends?
Is there going to be a press conference? Then no.
Well, you still get the media. You can still sit in the media section. I don't know.
We should disclose here. I did not pay for a ticket for All Out. I did fly myself there and hotel myself with Wrestlenomics funds. So thank you to all our supporters and listeners for allowing us to do things like this. But I had media access, so I did not have to buy a ticket. I will be buying a ticket to Buffalo though. So moving on to Clash of the Castle. Triple H, a very different press conference from Triple H. But I guess we will. What I have here is to what? Oh no. So Clash of the Castle announced 62,296 people in attendance at Principality Stadium on Saturday in Cardiff, Wales. Remarkably, that is almost exactly what WrestleTix found on the map. A new era, maybe a new era in this post-Vince world. The SummerSlam number was way off of what WrestleTix found, I believe, right? But this is pretty close. And, you got to understand that a lot of things that happened at WrestleMania were inherited from the Vince era. They weren't completely Triple H's whole plan. So that'll be interesting to watch going forward if WrestleTix numbers end up being, or just the visual look at the number and it looks a much more reasonable number.
I think I was very surprised that they announced that number. I figured they would announce a bigger crowd than they did for the Wembley SummerSlam. That would be the WWE patented move, which would be our show now is bigger than this legendary show from the past.
I recall seeing headlines even in media saying, Drew McIntyre in front of 70,000 people will do such and such, So they were at least getting media to say 70,000. And here they are announcing a number that's 8,000 short of that. A lot of comps probably, but this is surely a number that includes paid and comps.
Yes, tickets distributed is the key phrase, not tickets sold.
Yes. This, I don't know if I have this quite ready, but the cage match rating for this event, I believe, is 8.3. 8.3 for this event, which would make it the best rated event, pay-per-view event, PLE event on cage match for WWE since WrestleMania 2015. So, a great show. Everyone can agree this was a great show. I know, Jesse, you were foremost in praising this show. So,
I actually haven't seen all the show. I've actually only seen the Gunther Sheamus match in the main event. I haven't watched anything else. I don't know if I'll watch anything else on the show.
Yeah.
The atmosphere was like watching it was pretty crazy. Like when they were doing the chants for Bailey and all that, it really had like a Mania type feel. It seems like watching it just at home.
Yeah, I think the crowd was great. I think it saved a lot of creative shortcomings on the show, from what I saw, and kept that kind of special energy that people have about WWE at the moment, which is that the company is improving, and there's a lot of optimism about how good the product can be in the future under Triple H's leadership.
So here we just have the table from cagematch.net. It's now sitting at an 8.28. Usually what happens here is you start out at a kind of a high point, and then you gradually get a little bit lower as more votes come in, as more moderate voters come in. But 8.28, which would tie it with pay-per-views like Judgment Day 2000. But you have to go back. The newest pay-per-view on this list of the top 25 of all pay-per-views that have been reviewed on Cage Match, which they've all been reviewed. They all have a score of some sort. And the newest one, other than Clash at the Castle, is WrestleMania 31. That's, of course, the pay-per-view where it's Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar, and Seth Rollins cashes it in. The next newest pay-per-view is, I think it's like TLC 2020. No, it's not. That's lower. But like the next newest would be WrestleMania 30, I think. Yeah.
These are not including NXT takeovers, I'm assuming.
No, this is I guess pay-per-view is, they're not including takeover. Yeah. Those takeovers would definitely be in here if we were including takeovers as well as main roster pay-per-views. I didn't find that much newsworthy about this press conference. Triple H said that
it was interesting that they had it.
Yeah, definitely. Will we see more of these media calls? Like Tony Khan does the media calls. Triple H used to do the media calls ahead of takeovers. Will he start to do these media calls? Will he do more of these after pay-per-views? I would be excited to see that. Not that long of a press conference. It was certainly not the hour and a half affair or whatever the all-out pay-per-view press conference was. This was, I want to say, like 20 minutes to half an hour. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
And
30, I think it was 30 minutes, 32 minutes on the YouTube. I watched the whole thing and was able to watch it pretty quickly.
the only newsworthy things I got out of this was that he's going to talk to Bad Bunny soon about having more appearances at WWE. They're explicitly interested in having Tyson Fury have a WWE career after his boxing career is over.
Which apparently it is because he's retired.
Yep.
And Roman Reigns came out and somebody asked him a question. I think Alex McCarthy asked him a question. I don't remember what it was, but he was silent for like 30 seconds, just stared at people, and then asked him, totally in character, just said, I want you to do what they didn't acknowledge me. Everything else was somewhere between in character and out of character. They had Gunther out there and Drew McIntyre out there, and who else? It was not that memorable. Anything else to add there? Everyone applauded.
It was really bad, is what I'm saying. Like,
some people were wearing AW gear, or WWE gear. Excuse me.
Were people
They would've kicked
no,
out
but
probably if they-
were people wearing AEW gear at the AEW press conference?
I'm pretty sure no. I
Right.
don't know what AJ Austin was wearing, but
It was,
no, but it was no, not that.
It was a weird setting in that there was a lot of people. They showed the people gathered there, and there was a lot of them. I would say there was at least 30 to 50 people.
It was a lot of people, yeah,
in that
It was
room,
a
and
full room.
I don't know. Maybe there was a dozen questions asked in total. So most of these people did not ask questions.
These were not like what I would consider, I guess, for our purposes, newsworthy questions. These were mostly like, I don't know. And I've seen a lot of, people talking about what really is this, and it is weird, right? This situation that you're in, where you might be dealt with in a kayfabe way. You might be dealing with somebody like Roman Reigns. You might be dealing with people like Keith Lee and Swerve Scott who are doing this totally in kayfabe. You might be dealing with somebody like Chris Jericho, who's more than willing to like unpack all of the creative that went into his match. What are we doing there? Like, are you just like participating in a work or some sort of improv?
Are you part of the show? I mean, this first of all, just the first time WWE's done anything like this. I feel like it was set up very similar to, I think, AEW's kind of post pressures. It's Triple H and the Tony Khan role, and they brought out key people on the show who made an appearance. Some of them were big stars like Roman Reigns. Some of them were people who happened to win big matches like Gunther.
Yeah.
All the questions sucked. They were essentially all the same question, which was, this show was awesome. What was it like working on such an awesome show? That was basically asked 10 times, and then the press conference ended. I don't think the wrestlers said anything interesting. Triple H didn't really say anything interesting, just kind of spoke. Triple H is very friendly, and he's very, he's a very good talker in these kind of settings, but he didn't really give off he didn't reveal anything that was interesting. It was all very much like, we're happy to be here. Everyone's got to work really hard. We have a great roster. We're hoping to do this. We hope to come back here. We hope to come back to Europe. Like, he's just in full promoter mode, which is fine to what you expect, but it's really not worth your time going to watch unless you're curious to me what kind of a WWE press conference looks like. It'll be very interesting to see if they do this for their US pay-per-view shows. It might actually get me to go to Survivor Series if they do.
Which is in Boston.
Okay. And how not to say that the UK media everyone in the UK media isn't experienced to do this, but if they do have it in the United States, you'll see people like Nick Hausman, people like Sean Ross Sapp, people like Will Washington, people who are going to ask, who are used to this kind of setting and will ask, I think, real questions about the product, and how will Triple H react to that, and how will the talent react to that. I don't think they're going to be as, what's the right word? Accommodating towards whatever WWE wants to present with this press conference.
Give me one good question that he should have been asked. Triple H should have been asked in this situation.
Man, there's so many. I mean, now people didn't want to go there, but I'd ask the question that no one asked, and you want to talk about the Hawani interview, you can. I'd ask, how do people feel safe in your company? You know, the CEO of the company, the most powerful person in the company, just resigned in disgrace because, in part because he was having a sexual relationship with many different people that work here. Like, what are you doing to ensure that those people feel safe?
And the
That's
head
a
of
question.
talent relations.
Yeah, that's a question that he hasn't asked. No one's asked him, to my knowledge.
And we've been through an
since he's-
earnings call where nothing like that was brought up too, which
I mean,
isn't
even things
necessarily
like
the place I expect it to be brought up. But yeah,
even things like Roman Reigns won again through interference. Who do you think is going to eventually beat Roman Reigns? Are you preparing for somebody to beat Roman Reigns? You can ask him these questions. You don't have to live in the kayfabe world where, you know, he might give a non-answer, but those are much more interesting questions than just praising the show and saying, what was it like working in this kind of atmosphere? Why wasn't the show in London? Why was it in Cardiff? You know, there's so many things you could ask Triple H if you were to sit down and talk to him. And
go ahead, sorry.
no, go Chris, go.
I would just say one question that I thought should have been asked, and even Ariel Helwani kind of danced around it. He brought up NXT Europe, but he didn't address the mass releases from the NXT UK roster. Like, if you're launching a new product, why release so many talent? Like, I mean, that was a Vince type move to just do. This was Triple H's first budget cut, I guess you could say. And
Yeah,
Helwani brought up NXT Europe, but didn't ask that.
More questions you could ask him. Do you want to get talent that's working in AEW right now? Talent that used to work with in NXT. We've seen NXT talent that was released come back. Are there people that you're looking to get eventually from other companies? What do you think about NXT UK closing? You know, did it end up being as successful as you wanted it to be? You know,
one thing I could take away from
endless amount of questions.
One other thing I could take away from the AEW presser that we didn't talk about yet that I think is related to this and related to possibly related to the contract tampering issue is that, you know, Malachi Black, and I believe this was not seen on air but only seen live in the building. He sort of did this big bow, which insinuates that maybe he's done in AEW for a while or permanently. I understand he posted something on social media, right, that makes it sound like maybe he's leaving. Someone asked, Will Washington, I believe, asked Tony in the press conference what that was about, essentially. Tony wouldn't comment on it. So that makes me think that he's, you know, if he's staying, why would you make that clear? So it wouldn't surprise me. Again, this is totally just my read and speculation, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were, trying to contact Malachi Black, Aleister Black, whatever you want to call him, and or if that's one person who they were allegedly tampering with, and maybe he wants to go back because, I mean, look, what has he really done in AEW? Maybe he feels like he can be more fulfilled in WWE under Triple H.
Plus, his wife is there as well, so
Selena Vega. Okay, have you both watched the this Ariel Helwani interview with Triple H?
yes.
Yeah.
Main takeaways. There's multiple flavors of ice cream. None of them are comparable, better, or worse than any other. They're just different. They're not better. They're not right or wrong. Just different. One flavor may be chocolate. The other flavor may be shit. Don't compare them.
So the follow up. So I don't know if you want to get into like the question, what you're alluding to here before, but
yeah. So I'll read this. So this is Paul Levesque on Vince McMahon. He says Vince McMahon has nothing to do with the product anymore. And one of the things that I don't want to say outright said, but alluded to me is like, look, you're going to do things. You cannot think about how I would do things. You have to think about what you want to do and how you feel like it's best for the product. You know, I might not like it, but I understand why you're going to do things you're going to do. You have to do what you feel is right. He goes on to say later, this is Triple H talking, everybody would think to themselves, well, I would have done that slightly differently. You know, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. We use the term all the time in the business. Chocolate and vanilla, right? I want chocolate. You want vanilla. One of us has to pick a flavor. He, meaning Vince, would always pick the flavor. Now it's my turn to pick the flavor. It's all good. It's all ice cream, right? But it's my time to pick the flavor, and I have to be confident in those decisions. And I can't look back and say, well, what would Vince want to have for flavor? You know, because it just wouldn't be authentic then.
So Helwani doesn't ask the follow-up, which I'd be dying to ask, which would be, what is one thing you want to do that Vince McMahon wouldn't want to do? What are those actual differences in flavors that we're talking about? Mm-hmm. We as the viewer can see some obvious differences, but what, in Triple H's words, are the big differences between things Vince McMahon would do and things that he wants to do? And put that on the record.
Yeah. If there's press conferences with Triple H after PLEs in the future, I think that's one of the key questions, especially if certain metrics continue to be better in the Triple H era versus the Vince era, which they are so far. Some of them, you know, maybe attendance, definitely Raw ratings. I think you ask him something to the effect of, hey, look, ratings for Raw have been better in these months than those months. You've alluded to differences in creative. What do you think the biggest differences are in your way of doing creative versus his?
And to me, that's not like a gotcha question. It's asking for more clarity. And this is what I've gotten a lot from Triple H's comments, which is he just kind of speaks vaguely about, you know, the job Vince McMahon did and the job he's going to do, and it's going to be different. But we never get any real specifics on what that vision is or anything like that. It's all this vague, yeah, you know, I can't do the same thing Vince did, and Vince knows that, and so I'm going to go and do my vision. But there's never really any concrete explanation of anything that would indicate what those visions actually are. We have the product that kind of shows that, but it would be very interesting to get that in his own words.
So is he truly in a rock and a hard place, though? Like, if you're helping him with PR, what should he say?
I don't work in PR, so I don't know.
But if you were, what could he say that would not be a detriment to the company and wouldn't make the company look bad, but would be more effective? And I think the value is in what would be more honest to the extent that it builds more trust, and it also doesn't harm the company, doesn't harm the optics.
I don't work in PR, but I mean, you could be honest and say Vince, you know, didn't like saying the word wrestling. We all know that. That's very obvious. You know, I'm not as adverse to that. And so we've had that word on our product more often, and we think that fans like that word. So we're going to be using that more often going forward. I mean, that's just something obvious you could say that would be at least honest, because it's what we've seen with the product, right? They acknowledge other stuff that happens in wrestling outside of just a limited WWE universe. Something else you could say that'd be, I guess, more diplomatic. I think he has been, for this entire time since he came back, very and very understandably diplomatic about all of his responses. He never says a bad word about Vince. He never says a bad word about things that happened before. He's very ambivalent about him stepping back from NXT and what happened there and everything like that. He's always very protective of the company, which I would be, if I was working in PR, I think he'd be doing a really good job at that.
Yeah.
But the media needs to pressure him on that. That's the goal they have. And I mean, BT Sport, right, is WWE's media partner in UK. So this is similar to like Ariel Helwani, even though he's, I believe, Canadian journalist. This would be like him giving an interview. This would be like Triple H giving an interview with Ryan Satin for Fox. It's not necessarily an independent media interview. It's an interview with a media partner.
There are some differences between Ariel Helwani and Ryan Satin, but
not in this interview, to be honest. Okay. There are in as far as like their careers in journalism and things like that. But not in this interview.
Yeah. Would it be bad for business for him to say something to the effect of, you know, I helped Vince and I learned a lot from him, but I thought for a while that I could do the job even better than he did. He won't even say that though. But is that I feel like that would at least be nearer to honesty.
That's a very interesting point, Brandon. I haven't thought about that. I think it would help business. You're building up your brand. You're building off them. Look, WWE's doing really well business-wise, not because they have a hot angle or Roman Reigns is suddenly really over as champion. they're doing really well business wise because there's this positive optimism that the company is going to do much better under Triple H. And so far, according to like Cage Match and some of the fan rating systems that we have,
And Raw TV ratings, Nielsen.
yeah, Raw TV ratings, live attendance is up. The business is up on an upward trajectory. It's not because of any specific angles or stars suddenly being big draws. It's because the lapsed fans have come back to the product and feel positive about it. And Triple H in an interview saying, I think we're going to be even better than we were under Vince. I've got so many ideas. We're ready to go. This is going to be awesome. We're going to have new stars popping up left and right. I mean, that would get me as a fan really excited about the product. And I think there would be a really positive opinion on the company, and it would help your company, I think. But they're very protective of the legacy of Vince, and they probably will always be as long as the McMahon family's name is attached to the product.
It could have been a little more, maybe, I guess, skirting around a topic, but he could have said something like, listen, growth is huge for our company. It's huge for our investors, and you're going to have to make changes to grow. And we were stagnant in a lot of areas. And with me, we've seen, nice growth in the 1 or 2 months I've been under. Like, if he were just honest, and I mean, that's what investors want to hear. They want to hear about growth. And he's not saying Vince sucked. We had to make elements of change to increase growth. And you see the ratings. Do they do 62,000 people in Cardiff with Vince McMahon's creative? Like,
I think they don't immediately. The Cardiff show, I think, is kind of like a one-off because they sold a lot of tickets before Vince stepped down, for starters, and just that's such a special show, the first major event they've had in Europe in 30 plus years. Yeah. That's to me is kind of isolated, but like things like the Survivor last year for Survivor Series, they were really struggling to sell tickets in New York City. This year for Survivor Series, they sold out almost instantly in Boston. That's the trip. The reason they did that was because people are really excited about the product in a way that they weren't for a really long time under Vince.
Yeah. And so I'm raising, like, couldn't he just say this? Wouldn't that be okay for business? Now, this is not just a business relationship that he has to face. It's a personal and family relationship with his father-in-law and perhaps with his wife that are involved here.
I think you're right, Brandon. I think he could say that and it would be good for business. But we're talking about the other aspect is that, like you said, they're protective of Vince McMahon's legacy as the greatest wrestling promoter of all time. And they're not going, at least in the immediate aftermath of this transition period, acknowledge that there were deficiencies in the product under Vince.
Yeah, the closest, and we don't have the quote ready here, but there is something he says in this interview about, when where Ariel Helwani sort of gives him this softball about how, things feel different. Are people more excited? And he's like, yeah, well, if you do one formula for a long time, I think people are more excited. But, that's not quite saying that I'm doing things better. Anyway, I thought there were some interesting comments here about Stephanie McMahon's leave of absence that he comments on. He talks about Stephanie McMahon announced her leave of absence on May 19th. A temporary leave of absence, said she would be back. And this is the version, according to Triple H, after Stephanie decides that she's going to take this leave of absence. According to Triple H, Vince is like, great, yeah, you need to take some time, take a breath. All that stuff, Triple H says. He goes on. She doesn't know what it's going to, doesn't know what it's going to be. A brief aside, Triple H speaks in a lot of sort of half sentences, as I noticed in transcribing this. Anyway, doesn't know what it's going to be, doesn't know what she's going to do, but just needs that time. Spend it with me, spend it with the kids, spend it with family. We're like 3 weeks into this, as this process is unfolding, the drama of it all. And we're at one point where we're like 3 weeks in, and we're going up to our lake house to relax, and she's ready to go up there. This is the beginning of the full-on take a break, right? And we're literally in the car driving up there, and we get the phone call that says, we need you to step in. Would you step in as chairwoman and CEO in the now? And she's like, can I call you back in a little bit and think about this for a minute? And we spend the rest of the drive driving up there, And there was a time limit on that. Like, yeah, no. They need to know now, or they need to know. How credible does this sound?
Why are you skeptical of it?
Well, let's go to Stephanie's comments on the earnings call from August 16th, where Brandon Ross is asking her how important it is to her personally to continue having WWE in her family's legacy. Brandon Ross asks, can you tell investors whether being co-CEO is what you want for the long term? Brandon Ross, the analyst from Lightshed, is sort of beating around the bush of, are you interested in WWE selling, or are you opposed to that? Stephanie's response is, thank you. I've worked in WWE for a long time. I've worked I've worked my entire life for the business. I took a leave of absence realizing that I needed a little bit of time with my family given the grueling schedule and nature. I got about 3 weeks, which is more than a lot of other folks get, and I was not forced into returning as the CEO and chairman in the interim position I offered. That's the main difference that I see here. In her comments on August 16th on the earnings call, she says she offered to take the position, and here's Triple H describing a situation in which she was called and asked to step in. So I don't know. I'm skeptical of Triple H's description of Vince's response to her leave of absence, where he says, Vince is like, great, yeah, you need some time, take a breath, all that stuff. That doesn't sound like the Vince McMahon that I've heard about all these years, who, oh yeah, you need to take time off? Yeah, time off, go for it.
No, he doesn't believe in time off, so why would he want that for his daughter that he wanted, we assume wanted to take over the company?
Did Vince have a lot of confidence in his daughter and his role in that role?
And there's also somebody's got the story wrong, whether it's here or Business Insider putting that story out soon after Stephanie McMahon's leave of absence, saying that according to one WWE insider, Vince is the one who pushed her out.
Right, and that's why. Okay, that would seem to. If we're under the suspicion that it sounds very atypical of Vince to be like, yeah, you can take time off. Doesn't seem like Vince's personality, right? But
Yes.
if Vince did not view this person as particularly valuable or necessary for the company's success, perhaps he'd be okay with him taking time off.
I'm sure it's much more complicated than this.
No, and it's his family and it's his grandkids. I mean, I'm still always very speculative of, we don't know the whole details of why she needed time off. Obviously, Triple H had a health scare that was probably very emotionally draining on her and her family. There could have been something going on with relatives, her children, something that required more time, and they needed to take time off for that. I think the speculation about, oh, Stephanie was bad at her job, so they got this is actually her being fired. Seems
I think it's very conspicuous too that, okay, this happens on May 19th. The board is in the process of their investigation into Vince McMahon's NDA payments at that time. Stephanie and Triple H, Paul Levesque, are both members of the board of directors. It's hard to believe they wouldn't be aware of the investigation before she announces her leave of absence. That, of course, is not addressed in this interview.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's some talk about AEW here that Ariel Helwani brings up. I don't know how much of this I'll read, but let's see. Ariel asks, I remember asking Nick Khan himself this question about AEW last August. He said, no, everything is competition. Entertainment is competition, so I'm just curious for you. Do you consider them, AEW specifically, as competition? Paul Levesque says, okay, again, and that's funny. I've heard Nick say that, and I've heard people say to him that that's a cop-out answer. It's not a cop-out. Everything is competition. If we pay attention to everything, you have to. Do we pay attention to AEW? Do I watch it on a week-to-week basis? No. Am I aware of what's happening there? To a degree, right? I'm not following everything they do. There's sometimes I'll see somebody would say, well, that's very similar to what AEW did. I just had no idea, you know? At the end of the day, you have to focus on what you're doing, right? You have to focus on your product. It doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. If people want to watch that product, there's nothing I could do about it. There's nothing that's going to prevent them from doing that, right? I focus on my product, make my product the best product it can possibly be. I have confidence in that ability for this team, for the amount of people, for the talent that we have. I'll put our talent against anybody, you know. That is how you are successful. Monday Night Football is a massive thing for us. We have to pay attention to that. Absolutely, we pay attention to all sports on television. We're very strategic about where we put our events and how, not because we think we'll try to block that or we think we'll do this. Like, no, we're going to put them in the places where we think we will do the best business. That's all it is. There's nothing more to it than that. And I think that is where people get lost in the small thinking of what happens on a day-to-day basis. It's the much bigger overall picture that needs to stay in front of you of where you're trying to get to. A lot of words, not a lot of substance is my read of that answer. It speaks somewhat to what Tony would say a few days later in the press conference. Tony Khan expressing some displeasure at there being WWE events on his Labor Day weekend.
Hey, Brandon. 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon was obviously the optimal time for NXT Worlds Collide. There would never be a better time for that event than 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon on Labor Day weekend.
Mm-hmm. They could have put it on at 8. Maybe.
The two notable things here are first that he admits that AEW beat NXT, which is something you wouldn't necessarily expect WWE to openly admit. We know it's true, but it's something that they admit. And by saying they beat us would imply that there was some form of competition, even though he then says that it wasn't really competition. Well, you can't beat somebody if you're not in competition with them, right?
We might as well read the last excerpt from this interview that's related to what you're saying there. So Ariel Helwani asks if NXT was punished for not winning the Wednesday Night War, essentially, and Paul Levesque says no, it's nonsense. No, look, people put so much pressure on this, all this competitive wars. It never was that. Look, first of all, they beat our developmental system. Good for them, right? No, it never was that. There was never even a pressure of like, you have to beat that. It was never that. It's put on the best product we could. Like I said, it shifted over time during the pandemic. All of that shifted over time. And the opportunity for us to change back to what it truly was, right? He goes on to some stuff about NXT UK. But that's the pertinent section there. So
can I just say one thing?
Please.
Hate the way Ariel Helwani asked this question.
His full question was, so just curious, you know, what there was that story, and that's why I appreciate you being here and maybe putting to rest some theories out there. NXT went head to head with AEW. It didn't beat them. We're gonna punish it. Was that a real thing? That's Ariel's.
He's like, Ariel asks it with the clear incredulousness of these rumors. They're not possibly true, Paul Levesque. I'm glad you're here to talk about why these rumors are not true at all. Tell us how not true they are. That's basically the tone of his question. You can trim that down and ask the second half of that question, which is NXT went head to head with AEW and it couldn't beat them. Do you feel like you were punished for that? That's how a real question would be asked. Instead, it's filled with these platitudes about how I'm glad you're here to put to rest these theories that people have, these wild conspiracy notions. That's not the way you should ask a question from an unbiased news perspective.
And while we have a media ethics lesson in mind from Phil Brooks, who was Ariel Helwani's agent until a few years ago?
I believe he's friends with Nick Khan, Brandon. You got to disclose who your friends are.
Okay.
When I do an interview, Brandon, with anyone, I just tell them my whole list of friends. I just take out my phone and I just say, look, I'm friends with, Cody and Amanda and all these people that, like. That's how real journalists work. You disclose who your friends are.
I think one thing that's been really prominent in the Triple H public relations playbook is this a proper use of the term gaslighting? Like, what? No, that was never that. What are you talking about? No, you're just making such a big deal about this. What do you know? That's nonsense. It was never like that. Nobody ever told us that you have to beat them in the ratings. No, it just changed over time. We've seen this in Paul Levesque's final media appearances when he was overseeing NXT, where the NIL program was either about to be launched or things were evidently changing. Nick Khan and Vince McMahon had made their faithful trip to the Performance Center, and there was an evident change in talent recruitment. And people were asking Triple H about this, and he was like, "No, we've never changed. Right? It's always been this way." Nothing is. It seems as if Paul Levesque, if only according to his public comments, which I think are different from his private comments and his private thoughts, it's as if Triple H lives in this world that has never experienced change. It is extremely static, and that's the world that we're supposed to live in. We're supposed to believe it exists.
And he also mentioned, I mean, and he got appropriately ridiculed on social media for this by implying that NXT was just developmental, when he over and over again said expressly not the case. Many times.
I think he's has like directly answered questions along those lines. Is like, it's both. Yes.
Well, I was just saying there should have been a follow up with the punishment question too. Put out specifics. Break out that Road Dogg and Ryan Katz were fired from NXT. Like there was major changes. William Regal and all that. Dave Sapolsky. Like that's the question should have been asked, because that is
Scott Armstrong. A
lot of people lost their jobs because NXT lost the war.
It's funny. Sometimes the conversations you have with people on the record are different from those you have on background. He talks too about NXT UK as part of this response. He says the decision to pull NXT UK back. And remember, he's kind of talking to a UK audience here. It's the right decision for us. We had plans to do what we're going to do now. Then right before the pandemic hit, and it took it all away. We weren't able to do that. Our partnership with BT allowed it to stay on the air the whole time, but the truth is it was totally different from where we wanted it to go. We're pulling it off the air now so that we can get NXT Europe get to NXT Europe, because it's tough to do both at the exact same time. To continue to operate a product but build a new product around it. We're going to pull it off for a little bit. We're going to bring NXT Europe back in a bigger way than it ever was before. And the intent is, hopefully, if we're successful at it, is to replicate that. So it's NXT Europe, it's NXT India, it's NXT South Africa, it's NXT Mexico. Be able to take those products, put them around everywhere, and eventually over time build brands in those markets locally and build World Cup scenarios around that, where, they're competing on that level all over the globe. And that tide then feeds into Raw and SmackDown. So he sounds like he's describing global localization as still a strategy that's being developed. NXT UK is just, you can't do both at the same time. You can't do NXT Europe and go right from NXT UK to NXT Europe. You have to pull it back first, right?
I don't think so. I mean, there could have been a few things asked about NXT UK. Not only the releases, but what could have been asked is there still a relationship with Progress and ICW? And we heard about the low salaries that the NXT UK talents had. That could have been asked too.
It's also, he also alludes to the old original kind of vision. Remember, he had the chart with all the NXTs on different continents. And that was something that we had heard under Vince had been kind of cold, that they weren't going to have all these different NXT, locations in different parts of the world. And Triple H at least gives the impression that under his vision, that's still the long-term goal, is to have like an NXT India and NXT South Africa and all these different emerging markets to eventually have this like global NXT domination. And it does raise the question of, will WWE pursue that? I mean, there were talks about them potentially buying Pro Wrestling Noah at one point, or buying into a Japanese wrestling promotion. Is that something that we could see happening under Triple H now that Vince is gone, after Vince kind of put the kibosh on that, or at least we're led to believe that?
Yeah, he didn't mention Japan, for what that's worth. I'm guessing what we're going to see is his previous strategy was to put PCs and NXT brands on all these different locations around the world. I'm guessing what's going to end up happening here is NXT Europe is going to be a leaner, more broad version of NXT UK, where you're not running maybe a weekly show, but you have occasional shows in this area rather than doing all this sort of hard brick and mortar investment that may or may not be what you need to effectively develop talent. I'm guessing that's what we're going to see.
In some of the reports around NXT Europe have been not necessarily super encouraging. Obviously, they released a lot of the NXT UK talent, which you think they would hold on to if they're big on building NXT Europe. And I think the
It was truly
Observer
going to be bigger than what the NXT UK was.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Observer wrote that NXT Europe, at least, was something that was being discussed more as a theory than a real thing at this point. And there aren't really a ton of express plans for doing that. I've heard people mention that with NXT, with the UK leaving the European Union and the kind of the issues that it comes with getting European international talent into that country, this might be a way for them to reassess their vision for their European WWE model, and then maybe moving NXT out of the UK and into another European country where it's easier to get foreign talent licenses to work. Could be something as simple as them relocating from London as their headquarters to like Dublin, Ireland, or another, would be another English-speaking country in Europe.
Yeah. So, like, my main takeaway from this interview was my feeling up to this point has been pretty optimistic about what W is going to be able to do without Vince. I guess I've been a big proponent of the notion that a lot of W's problems come down to, at least their problems with developing consumers, developing fans, selling tickets, encouraging TV ratings, and so forth, has been down to the issues around Vince McMahon being the head of creative. Mm-hmm. And we've seen him out of the way now, finally, in this reality that was almost unfathomable. Maybe he would have to die, or maybe his health would have to be affected for this to ever happen. And now it's happening, and now we're seeing some things improve. And I feel like what I've been yelling about for a long time is being validated. And I'm still optimistic about the creative. I guess just the feeling of trust and the feeling of credibility around Paul Levesque as an executive was not encouraged after my listening to this interview. He's not credible to me when it comes to AEW. He's not credible to me talking about NXT UK. He's not credible to me talking about AEW, and he's not credible talking about Vince. I think he's sort of gaslighting the audience of this interview. So.
He's more media friendly than Vince was. Obviously, Vince was maybe the most.
Vince just didn't participate.
Yeah, he was not. So he's definitely more media friendly than Vince. But is he? Are his public comments really going to be frequently interesting or valuable? I would say no. They'll only be valuable in the sense that he may say some things that contradict other things that have happened.
I would like to think that there's a balance of, like, he could be more honest while not burying the company.
Why would you think Triple H, what in his career would indicate one of honest public perception, though?
I don't know, but I think there's like a good business result in building trust with your audience, even if it's in these sort of downstream interviews. That would help the company. And maybe this is not the person to expect it from, but I think it's possible. And I think and we'll say this too, like, we are in a day where there's real questions about Tony Khan's management style. And I don't think there are similar questions. Like, what may be a weakness for Tony Khan in terms of managing all these big personalities and egos may not be as big of a problem for Paul Levesque. I believe that's probably the case.
Tony Khan is subject to the reality that individual stars have a bigger role to play in his business model than WWE's current business model, where no individual star really can make that big of a difference on the bottom line. So you don't have someone like CM Punk who is able to kind of control, be unprofessional and get away with it in that way. I guess Brock Lesnar would be.
I think that being the case in WWE has just been a byproduct of Vince doing bad creative for a decade or two. And I think you could even look at Roman Reigns, and I think Roman Reigns is by far their biggest regular star, especially if we're excluding Brock Lesnar out of that formula. And I think Roman Reigns inhabits a similar place in terms of importance and economic value that CM Punk does in their respective companies. So if he does, Paul Levesque may or may not view it that way as you described. But I think the reality is another thing. And I tend to think that Paul Levesque does view that stars, and I think Vince even viewed that stars could be important. Yeah, I guess I'm sort of not agreeable to the idea that like the brand is a draw, and that's an intentional situation. I think it's just more of a byproduct of somebody who couldn't create stars really well. Yeah, and tried to even. Who has more effort and resources been poured into making him a major star than Roman Reigns over the last years?
Yeah, and that's always been my pushback in the sense that people make it seem like Vince isn't trying to make a star, doesn't want to make a big star because he's afraid they're going to leave for Hollywood like The Rock or John Cena did. And I always think don't excuse Vince's incompetence for intention.
It's all just look at how brilliant it is. Look at how brilliant this incompetence is.
Yeah, it's there's a reason why they haven't been able to get someone over. It's because Vince hates it. It's like, no, well, he's dedicated more resources to getting this one guy over. He can just afford to be more stubborn in his initial thinking and not listen to other people because of the security that comes from the way the company is organized and the money that they can generate year over year thanks to media rights and just being an established legacy brand that people will be attached to no matter what. No matter what scandals pop up or no matter how bad the product is, people will continue to watch it in a large enough audience to make the company very, very valuable as a media company and as a touring brand.
I guess what I'm saying here is like I think Paul Levesque is too smart to believe the things that he's saying here,
as opposed to Vince,
who's just genuinely out of touch with what the business was,
whose brain was mush. Yes.
So I think Paul Levesque is too smart to believe the things that he's saying here. And I think there's also a PR strategy where you could come off better and develop more trust with wrestling fans and other people of influence who influence wrestling fan trust. Which
I
is
think
also
that's
good
fair.
for business. All right, we're way past Jesse's time limit here.
Yeah, we got 2 quick super chats.
If Jesse, you have to go, that's fine. We
Yeah.
can deal with super chats, but
I'm okay for
totally
the
up
next
to
few
you.
minutes.
All right, just real quick here. Big Time Baxter has 2. So this one, it looks like the Vince allegations have cooled since he retired. How likely was the person leaking stuff was aiming to bring Vince down?
I think the person leaking stuff was aiming to bring Vince down. Otherwise, why wouldn't they have leaked it in the first place? Whether it was somebody that people would recognize as an eternal name in the company looking to seize power, I have no idea.
It seems likely that it was someone on the board of directors, but I have no sense of who it might have been or whether that was an executive member or whether that was an independent member. And it may not even necessarily be somebody whose intent was to get him removed, but to make people aware of it and let the consequences fall where they may. But
And real quick, our last super chat, once again from Big Time Baxter. How's Raw Third Hour performing under Triple H lately?
I will open up the Wrestlenomics viewership spreadsheet that you can get access to at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics for $5 a month, including lots of other benefits. Third Hour, I'm pretty sure, has been doing better. But to give you some sort of actually quantitative answer. So what I have here in front of me is a 8 to 10 o'clock comparison. So from 8 to 10 o'clock, total viewership last week was down 10%. Week before that, 7%, 5%, 4%. And that's mostly in the Triple H era. Before that, it's 19%, 5%, and usually it is a little bit worse than that. Demo, though, why don't we just put this on the screen because this is going to make a lot of sense if I just describe it. So if I go to share the screen, we're going to share the spreadsheet. So what I'm looking at here, which is conditionally formatted in red and green, what we see, especially in the demo, I suppose, is the major difference. We actually see some increase between 8 and 10. That meaning that the third hour was more viewed. The third hour was more viewed than the first hour. We have seen that. We did see that in the last couple of weeks of Vince, but we have seen it. I don't know. I don't know if this is super significant in fact. I want to say from reporting on Raw ratings over the last few weeks that it has been a better retention of viewership, but it's not super clear here, especially this August 1st episode where it was substantially down. That is 14% in the demo.
And lastly, not a question, but a compliment for Jesse here from MJ. Jesse's article was fantastic and very well written. Thank you, MJ.
You can read Jesse's article right now on Wrestlenomics.com. It's out there, free for everybody, no subscription required.
Thank you, MJ. The article is about kind of examining how we discuss and analyze wrestling, especially the week-to-week wrestling television format, and how our perspective can be skewed by the sheer amount of discussion and analysis we consume through social media, and how that may impact our ability to both assess current trends in the company as well as the quality of the product when we are forced to either give or receive takes about the product on a week-to-week basis where stories are often incomplete. I kind of wrote it like I wasn't 100% confident in kind of the thesis, but it got really good reviews and people have said very nice things about it, including MJ just now. So I would definitely recommend and reading it.
We've
appreciate
also
everyone.
We've also been asked in response to your article if this means this is the end of this podcast.
Right, we're all part of the problem, and I freely admit that.
I would say that we're not, but I would say like what your article is about analyzing content, and that for the most part is not what we do. We analyze the business and the motivations that result in the content.
Well, if I touch on this real quick, someone mentioned to me that they disagreed with the article because they saw this as like kind of like an anti-intellectualism format of wrestling, that I was arguing that people shouldn't be critical of the product, they should just consume it, and they shouldn't
sit back and enjoy
and get ready for more product, right?
Don't question it, just
exactly. And I understand how people come to that conclusion, but my argument is that I think yes, it's fine to be critical of the product, and it's fine to give assessments, after, give your AEW thoughts or your Raw reviews or whatever you want to do after each week, but be more cognizant of we are not seeing the full story develop week to week. I think the CM Punk and Jon Moxley angle that has unfolded, I think, is a good example, in that people were extremely confused after the last few Dynamites about what this angle was or where it's going to go, and everyone had their takes on what a terrible build this was and all of that. But I think if you step back and you look at the week-to-week development of it, it's a pretty straightforward story that I think made sense. But that was kind of lost in people being very confused and having to give immediate reactions to things like CM Punk being squashed on Dynamite 2 weeks before the pay-per-view. But
I have like a Vince-centric view of the business, but I think, we're all sort of messed up by what Vince has made so normal, in that it not that there won't be Raw and Dynamite review podcasts for as long as those shows exist, but that there's a lot of frustrating stuff that encouraged that sort of analysis because of the particular way, and I would argue incompetent way, that Vince booked his product for as many years as he did that, and that sort of justly motivated all of these sort of you come together and share our trauma circles and our frustrations, and just sort of the airing of grievances together.
Right. I think with WWE, Vince taught the fan base to not be patient with the product, because if you were patient with the product, you were going to be disappointed because the long-term story apparatus was completely broken. I think with other wrestling promotions, they at least have done enough in some cases, like AEW or New Japan Pro Wrestling, to deserve the benefit of the doubt when people are questioning immediate reactions to each episode of television. Well, as opposed to WWE, I think that reputation over time has been earned for people to be pessimistic about the product based on certain segments, because we have a long-term pattern that suggests that you should be pessimistic because optimism is not rewarded in that company. Perhaps that'll be different under Triple H.
Let it play out. This is something that Triple H has told the media and told the public about what you need to, how you need to watch main roster, watch Vince's product.
And people are more optimistic about it. It's definitely, I think, if Vince was still running the company and they gave that Clash of the Castle finish with, Roman Reigns winning because a random member of his family popped up and screwed Drew McIntyre. I think if Vince was still in charge, people would be, oh my God, this is terrible, same old shit, blah, blah, blah. Triple H is in charge. People have way more patience and sudden optimism about the product. And so they're much more likely to be forgiving of what I would consider to be bad booking or disappointing booking.
Okay. We're now going head to head with Raw, and I don't want to be accused of anti-competitive behavior, so we should probably wrap up. Quickly, plugs. Jesse, you go first.
You can follow me on Twitter at Jesse Collings, JESSECOLLINGS. You can check out my podcast, Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. It's right here on YouTube. You can find it if you just Google on YouTube. Last episode was me. I did a solo pod. I had a last minute cancellation, so I tried out some solo audio where I talked a lot about Jim Ross and his role in AEW and kind of my thoughts on his current performance and then perhaps unnecessity of him being on the broadcast moving forward. So people can check that out. That got a lot of positive reviews as well. Like I said, I also wrote an article kind of about Jim Ross. That's on voicesofwrestling.com. But all that stuff, if you just follow me on Twitter, you'll be able to keep up with all of that.
Yes. Jesse has his own slide now.
Nice.
I do. My logo, I do not have a bigger version of that logo because I did not pay for the premium version of the logo maker, so it did not. So I just took a smaller version of it. Everything about this is a
it's in developmental. Okay, go.
Yeah, Chris Gullo, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. My other podcast, Rediscovering the Indies, we just released part 2 of Dragon Gate USA. We discussed the second, third, and fourth show from there. We discussed them running Labor Day weekend in Chicago in 2009. So it wasn't an innovative idea from with All In and all that. But we also discuss just stars like Jon Moxley, Mustafa Ali, Johnny Gargano, and a lot of people getting their first exposure with Dragon Gate USA. So.
Okay. You can subscribe to Wrestlenomics. The best way to support Wrestlenomics is to go to patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. Subscribe for $5 a month. You get access to my TV ratings reports that come out nearly every day. You get access to the viewership spreadsheet that we just looked at for a moment. You get access to the slides, including the slides for this program, as well as the industry reports, the annual ones for 2020, 2019, and 2021, as well as additional occasional reporting and analysis that I do at patreon.com/Wrestlenomics. I believe Chris Jericho has outed himself as a Wrestlenomics subscriber, among other people who work in the industry who are subscribing to Wrestlenomics on Patreon. So that's all for this week. Like, subscribe, recommend this to a friend. We appreciate it. Talk to you next time.